Hi, everyone, to the philosophy train. It's a pleasure to have you with us to a new episode. So, let's get started. Welcome to a journey into the depths of human discourse. In 1830, Arthur Schopenhauer penned a small but explosive treatise, a work he never published in his lifetime. The title, The Art of Being Right, or, in Latin, Eristic Dialectic. Have you ever wondered why some people always seem to win arguments, even when they're clearly in the wrong? Why the better argument doesn't always prevail? And why all of us, whether we admit it or not, sometimes resort to unfair tactics when push comes to shove? Schopenhauer had the answers, and they're uncomfortable. Today, we delve into a philosophical masterpiece of manipulation, rhetoric, and human nature. A work that remains timeless, perhaps precisely because it's so ruthlessly honest. The Art of Being Right. Let's begin.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something a bit notorious, an instruction manual for, well, intellectual street fighting.
That's a good way to put it. We're looking at Schopenhauer's The Art of Always Being Right.
Right, the art of winning an argument, even if you're wrong. Controversial dialectic, he called it.
Exactly. And our mission today, for you listening, is pretty straightforward.
Hmm.
We're going to run through all 38 stratagems Schopenhauer identified. Think of it less as a how-to and more like a defense manual, how to spot this stuff.
Yeah, because Schopenhauer is brutally honest about why people argue like this. He basically says it's not about finding truth. It's about our innate vanity. Once we state a position, our pride gets tangled up in it. We fight for the proposition, not necessarily what's objectively true.
He makes a really key distinction there. He separates logic, which aims for objective truth, from what he calls Eristic Dialectic, which is purely the art of getting the best of it in a dispute. How to win, full stop. But the irony, and this is crucial, is he wrote it down so honest people could recognize the tricks. It's an inoculation, really.
Okay, let's get into the tactics. We'll start with the ones that mess with language and the scope of the argument. Simple, almost invisible moves.
Right, the linguistic sleight of hand. So, trick one is extension. You take what your opponent says and stretch it way beyond its natural meaning. Exaggerate it.
Like if someone says, English drama has its strengths, and you retort, oh, so you think they're the best at everything. What about music? Opera? You make their specific point seem like a ridiculous universal claim.
Exactly. You create a caricature to attack. And closely related is trick three. Generalize your opponent's specific statements.
How's that different?
It's subtle. If they praise a specific aspect, say the quietists as good people, you ignore that specific point and attack something broader but related, like claiming their writings were nonsense. You shift the goalposts from the specific claim to a general one that's easier to shoot down.
Got it. Then there's the pure wordplay of trick two, homonyms.
Yes. Using a word with two meanings to deliberately confuse things. Schopenhauer's example is great. Confusing civic honor, meaning reputation, with knightly honor, the kind that demands a duel. You swap the meaning midstream.
Sneaky. And this fits with trick 12. Choose metaphors favorable to your proposition, right? Loading the language from the start.
Absolutely. It's about framing. Is it an innovation, which sounds kind of suspect and newfangled? Or is it a reform, which sounds positive and necessary? You embed your bias right into the description, calling public worship piety versus calling it bigotry. Same act, different spin.
Wow. Okay, so the words themselves are weapons. What about messing with the actual logic, the structure of the argument? The next batch seems like a corruption of, say, the Socratic method.
Exactly. It's about controlling the flow of information and admissions. Trick four is conceal your game. Don't lay out your premises logically, scatter them, ask questions out of order. So the opponent doesn't see where you're heading. They can't prepare. They just answer isolated questions, and then bam, you spring the conclusion they inadvertently admitted the parts of.
And you combine that with asking tons of questions, like trick 7, yield admissions through questions.
Yes, and trick 9, question in detouring order. Overwhelm them, especially if they're a bit slow on the uptake, confuse them with the sheer volume and the mixed-up order. They lose track of the main point.
Okay, then there's the classic logical fallacy, trick 6, postulate what has to be proven, begging the question.
Right, but disguised. And instead of proving, say, medicine is uncertain, you get them to agree that all human knowledge is uncertain. Well, if all knowledge is uncertain, then medicine must be too, right? You've smuggled the conclusion in as a premise.
What about using things that aren't even true?
That's trick 5, false premises. You use arguments or beliefs that your opponent holds to be true, even if you know they're objectively false. You use their own rule book against them, like quoting a scripture they believe in to corner them, even if you're an atheist.
Okay, that's devious. And if they start getting wary, denying your questions.
Then you use trick 10. Take advantage of the no-sayer. If they're just reflexively saying no to everything you need them to say yes to, ask for the opposite of what you actually want. Push them towards denying that, which implicitly affirms your real point.
Clever. How do you lock in the games from all these questions?
Trick 11. Generalize admissions of specific cases. You get them to agree on several specific instances, maybe small examples. Later, you just state the general rule derived from those specifics as if it's already been agreed upon. You don't ask for explicit confirmation of the general rule itself.
You just assume it. And trick 20, draw conclusions yourself. Don't wait for them to connect the dots.
Never. Once the premises are out there, you state the conclusion. Loudly, confidently. Don't give them a chance to object or question the leap.
What if they try to corner you by asking you to admit something?
The defensive move. Trick 22. Beg the question. Explicit refusal. If they ask you to admit something that directly leads to the point they want to prove, you just accuse them of begging the question. Turn it back on them. It's pure deflection.
And the last one in this logic-bending group, trick 24, state a false syllogism.
Yeah, this is about twisting their own words. You take their thesis, distort it, draw some ridiculous or dangerous-sounding consequence from it through faulty logic, and then claim their original point must be absurd because it leads to this nonsense. You're refuting a distorted version.
Okay, this is getting darker. We're moving from shady logic to outright psychological warfare now, right? Using emotions, playing the crowd.
Exactly. This is where Schopenhauer really leans into human weakness. The most basic is trick 8. Make your opponent angry.
Why anger?
Because, as he says, anger makes someone incapable of judging it right. They get flustered, make mistakes, lose focus. And related is trick 27. Anger indicates a weak point. If you hit a nerve and they get visibly angry, you know you found a vulnerability. Press that point. Hammer it home.
Nasty. What about making them look bad or inconsistent?
That's trick 16. Use your opponent's views against them. Argumentum ad hominem, but in a specific way. Show that their argument contradicts something they've done, said before, or contradicts the principles of a group they belong to.
Like his example, if they defend suicide, you ask, why don't you hang yourself? Brutal.
It is. It shifts focus from the argument's merit to the opponent's perceived hypocrisy. Another way to make them look bad is trick 23, make him exaggerate.
How's that work?
You contradict their statement, maybe slightly unfairly, they get annoyed, and in defending it, they overstate their case, pushing it beyond its reasonable limits. Then you refute the exaggerated version, which is much easier. The audience thinks you've refuted the original point.
And sometimes you just fake it till you make it. Trick 14, claim victory despite defeat.
Pure bluff. Your points didn't land, the answers weren't helpful, but you act like you've won anyway. They declare victory in a triumphant tone. Schopenhauer notes this needs impudence and a good voice. Think about politicians doing this constantly.
Oh yeah, all the time. Now what about trick 28? Persuade the audience, not the opponent. This one sounds particularly relevant today.
It's incredibly common, especially with complex topics. You make an objection that sounds plausible to a general audience, but is actually flawed in a way only an expert your opponent would see.
So the expert knows it's nonsense, but
explaining why it's nonsense would take too long, be too technical, or bore the audience. So the cheap shot lands, and the audience thinks you scored a point. You win the crowd, even if the expert knows you're wrong.
That's quite effective, actually. And similar, maybe, is trick 31, this is beyond me, feigning ignorance.
Yeah, with a heavy dose of irony.
Yeah.
You basically say, well, what my opponent is saying is just so complex and high level, I certainly can't understand it. Implying to the bystanders that it must be pretentious nonsense.
Yeah.
You weaponize feigned humility.
How do you fight that?
Schopenhauer actually gives a counter, politely insists they can understand it, and carefully explain it until their feigned incompetence makes them look genuinely foolish. Takes patience, though.
Okay, what about cutting through logic altogether? Trick 35, will is more effective than insight. Appealing to self-interest.
This is maybe the most cynical. Forget reason. Show that your opponent's argument, if accepted, would somehow harm their own interests or the interests of their group or the audience.
Like the clergyman example. If his philosophical point contradicts church doctrine.
He'll drop it like a hot potato, Schopenhauer says, because his position, his income, his standing are threatened. Self-interest trumps truth. You make the argument too costly for them to maintain.
Wow. And if you just want to confuse everyone, trick 36, the Vicar of Wakefield move, just talk fancy.
Pretty much. Use pompous language, technical jargon, maybe some irrelevant Latin phrases. Sound incredibly learned and profound, even if you're spouting gibberish. The audience, and often the opponent, will assume deep meaning rather than admit they don't understand.
They assume density equals depth. Okay, and the absolute last resort, when you know you've lost the argument on merit.
Trick 38, the ultimate strategy. Argumentum ad personam. Go personal. Insult them. Be rude. Attack their character, their motives, anything but the argument itself. It's the final admission of intellectual defeat, really.
And the only defense, Schopenhauer says, is cold composure. Keep repeating, that has nothing to do with the point, and try to bring it back. Easier said than done.
Extremely difficult when you're being personally attacked. Okay, so we've covered language, logic, psychology. What's left? The final category seems to be about defense, evasion, and using authority.
Right, the escape hatches and shields. Let's start with just stopping the bleeding. Trick 18, interrupt, break up, divert the dispute, and trick 29, diversion. These seem similar.
They are. If you sense your opponent is building towards a winning point, you interrupt. Change the subject abruptly. Bring up something completely different, maybe something inflammatory or tangential. Anything to stop their momentum.
Like his China example, shift from the political system to some graphic detail about a punishment to derail the conversation.
Precisely. Or if you can't completely change the subject, broaden it. Trick 19. Generalize the matter, then argue against it. If they challenge your specific hypothesis, start talking about the general fallibility of human knowledge. Defend the broad, undeniable principle instead of your specific failing point.
Okay, another defensive tactic. Trick 17, defense through subtle distinction.
Ah, yes. When you're cornered by a specific counterproof, you suddenly invent a subtle distinction you hadn't mentioned before, one that conveniently allows your original statement to survive the attack. Ah, but I was talking about X in this specific sense.
Creating wiggle room after the fact. What about forcing their hand? Trick 13, agree to reject the counterargument. This sounds like a false dilemma.
It often is. You present two extreme options as the only possibilities, forcing them to choose the one you want them to accept, or reject the one you want them to reject. Like, should we obey our parents in everything or disobey them completely? It ignores the reasonable middle ground.
And sometimes, a weak argument deserves a weak response. Trick 21, counter with an argument as bad as his.
If they use a superficial or fallacious argument, don't bother with a deep refutation. Just hit back with something equally superficial. Remember, the goal is victory, not truth. Match their level.
Okay, moving to more specific counterattacks. Trick 25. Find the instance to the contrary, the single counterexample.
The apogoge. Very powerful against generalizations. If someone claims all ruminants are horned, you just say camel. One example can shatter a universal claim.
And trick 26, turn the tables, rhetortio, using their own argument against them.
Exactly. Whatever justification they use, you twist it to support your opposing action. Their example. He's just a child, we should make allowances. The retort. Precisely because he's a child, we must correct him, lest he grow up with bad habits. Same premise, opposite conclusion.
What about trick 33? It applies in theory, but not in practice. That sounds reasonable sometimes.
It sounds reasonable, which is why it's effective, but Schopenhauer calls it a sophism. Logically, if something is true in theory, meaning the premises are sound and the reasoning valid, it must work in practice. If it doesn't work in practice, it means there was a flaw in the theory, maybe a premise was wrong, or something was overlooked. But stating it this way allows you to concede the logic while denying the real-world consequence.
But people say that all the time. Good on paper won't work in reality. How do you fight that specific move?
Well, you could press them on why it won't work in practice, what specific factor invalidates the theory. But Schopenhauer also gives us trick 34. Don't let him off the hook. If your opponent is being evasive, dodging questions, shifting ground, like using the theory practice split, that's a huge red flag.
A sign of weakness.
A sure sign you've hit a weak spot, he says. Persist on that point. Keep asking. Even if you're not sure why they're being evasive, the evasion itself tells you something important is there.
Right. Now the ultimate shortcut, for many, trick 30, appeal to authority rather than reason.
Argumentum ad verecundiam. Hugely effective, especially against people who aren't widely read. quote some respected figure, a famous philosopher, maybe even use a Latin phrase they won't understand. Authorities, especially dead ones, carry immense weight.
And he warns about universal opinion too, right?
Yes. He points out that what most people consider universal opinion is often just the passively accepted view of 2 or 3 people from long ago, repeated without examination. It's a caution against groupthink disguised as authority.
So relevant today with information cascades online. Okay, nearly there. A couple more tactical plays. Trick 37, a faulty proof refutes his whole position.
This is subtle. Your opponent might actually be right about their conclusion, but they use a weak or flawed argument to try and prove it. You jump on the faulty proof, demolish it, and then act as if you've demolished their entire position, even though the conclusion itself might still be true for other reasons.
Attack the argument, not the core claim, but pretend you did both. And lastly, the quick dismissal. Trick 32, put his thesis into some odious category.
Labeling. Slap a negative prejudged label on their idea. Oh, that's just Manichaeism, or that's socialism, or that's idealism. If the label is already disliked or dismissed by the audience, you don't have to actually refute the argument. You just associate it with something unpopular. Guilt by association.
So we've gone through all 38. It's quite the arsenal of intellectual dark arts.
It really is. And it leaves you wondering, what was Schopenhauer really trying to achieve by laying all this out so clearly?
Well, like you said at the start, it seems less like a how-to guide and more like that inoculation. He's showing you the entire gamut of lawyers' tricks, as he puts it, so you can spot them. It's a defense against what he saw as the natural baseness of human nature, our tendency to prioritize winning over truth.
And the value for us, for you listening, is really in that recognition. Seeing the extension, the diversion, the ad hominem, the appeal to authority when it happens in a meeting, a debate, an online argument.
It gives you a fighting chance to not get manipulated by it.
Although Schopenhauer himself was pretty pessimistic about the whole enterprise, his actual advice was basically, don't argue with idiots.
Yeah.
Or, as he put it, avoid the common ruck of people.
Huh. So his ultimate advice is strategic disengagement.
Pretty much. Only debate, he said, with people you know, value truth, have intelligence, and possess self-respect. Otherwise, it's just frustrating and pointless.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe. If Schopenhauer cataloged these tricks almost 200 years ago, blaming them on our innate vanity and dishonesty, what does it say about us that these same 38 strategies are arguably more prevalent now in politics, online, everywhere? Are we just doomed to prioritize winning?
It's a sobering thought. Maybe we should remember the quote Schopenhauer includes from Voltaire. La paix vaut encore mieux que la vérité.
Peace is still better than truth. Something to definitely chew on. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation and picked up something valuable. If you liked what you heard, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a review. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and I'll catch you in the next episode.